Hi, everybody. Hey, um, so welcome to this preview video. This is a preview for one of the classes I'm going to be teaching in March of this year, 2023. It's a class on traditional Buddhist chanting. And let me just share my screen and get right to the presentation here. Um, so in this slide, let me make sure that my picture isn't in the way of anything that's important here. First of all, this image over here on the right side of the screen is the what am I doing here? Is taken from the Berzin Archives website. That's I think his name is Alexander Berzin. Anyway, he's an excellent source of information on just about anything to do with Buddhism. He's a Tibetan Buddhist. He's anyway. So he made this map to show the different types of Buddhism. So he lists them as I changed his label slightly: Tibetan, Vajrayana, East Asian, Mahayana, and Theravada Buddhism. And I've kind of taken this map and used to represent the different languages that are used in chanting in Buddhism in different parts of Asia. So in Central Asia, well, the idea here is that all Buddhists chant, and in different parts of Asia, people understandably chant in different languages. But as a general rule, everybody in different parts of Asia don't necessarily chant in their own language. In fact, very often, probably most of the time, they're not chanting in their own language or in their own everyday language. So, for example, in Southeast Asia, you will hear people chanting in Pali if you go to a Buddhist temple anywhere in Southeast Asia, down around here, in these places down here. Nobody in Southeast Asia speaks Pali. They just don't. No one has spoken the Pali language for well over 1,000 years, and it's not clear who did at any point in time. Just interesting. In Central Asia, on the other hand, here and here, you'll find people chanting in Tibetan. Now, not everyone in Central Asia speaks Tibetan, and even the ones who do speak Tibetan don't speak the kind of Tibetan that they're chanting. They're chanting a very old, classical, literary form of Tibetan. In East Asia, people chant in Chinese, and that includes people in places like Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. In Korea, in particular, the way that Buddhists chant is in Sino-Korean. It's called Sino-Korean, which is just the way the Koreans pronounce Chinese, or they pronounce the Chinese characters. So let me give a specific example of what I'm talking about. And this is the title of the Heart Sutra pictured here in this slide. It's 10 characters, and the way that I've been taught to chant the Heart Sutra, these characters are pronounced Mahabanya Bara Milta Shimgyong. Okay? And that's actually down here at the very bottom. Mahabanya Bara Milta Shimgyong. That's the Sino-Korean pronunciation in what's called Romaja, where Korean, the sounds of the Korean language are spelled out using the letters of the English alphabet. Koreans themselves don't write in Romaja, they write in Hangul, and this is the way Koreans would spell out the same sounds, more or less the same sounds. If you've ever been to a Japanese Zen center or a Japanese Buddhist temple of any kind, you'll have heard people chanting the Heart Sutra, and they pronounce the title Maka Hanya Hara Mita Shingyo, somewhat different. And I won't attempt to give the Vietnamese pronunciation, but this is the way that Vietnamese people write Vietnamese, and this is the way they write out their pronunciation of the characters. And I also won't attempt to pronounce the Mandarin, but this is the way Mandarin is written out in pinyin. Um, the point here being that, in a very real sense, everybody's chanting the same thing, but they're pronouncing it differently. All right, now let me tell a story. Let's see if I can get my picture out of the way sufficiently. Good. In the year 706, that is, you know, a long time ago, I think 2023 minus 706, over 1300 years ago, there were two friends in Korea named Puduk and Pakpak, and they both had the same dream. That is, they had one night, they had a dream, a very vivid dream. A golden arm appeared in the sky and reached out and touched them on the forehead. The next day, they were talking, and they told each other the dream, not realizing that each of them had had the same dream. And this resulted in a resolve on their part that they were going to, give up everything else in their lives and just devote themselves to spiritual practice. So they found a nice place on Paegwolsan Mountain, White Moon Mountain, and they built two simple huts, and they proceeded to just, for the rest of their lives, only devote themselves to their own practice. They had different practices. Puldu was devoted to Maitreya, the future Buddha, and Pakpak was devoted to Amitabha, the Buddha of the Western Pure Land. And so for 3 years, Pudul chanted to Maitreya, Pakpak chanted to Amitabha, and then one evening, Avalokiteshvara, that is Kwanzaa Bosal, appeared to them. And this is a really interesting story. One is chanting to Maitreya, one is chanting to Amitabha, but it's Kwanzaa Bosal who shows up. And so where's Maitreya? Well, Pudul transforms into Maitreya. Pakpak transforms into Amitabha. And word of this miraculous transformation spread. People came from surrounding areas and were able to hear the Buddha Dharma being taught directly to them by Maitreya and Amitabha. And eventually the two ascended up into the heavens. And as they rose up, they were still teaching the Dharma. So this, I won't say that this actually happened, but it is reported to have happened. So the two friends set off on their spiritual quest in 706, and after 3 years of hard training, that is 709, that's when this happened. A while later, the king of Silla, the Korea at that time, the Korean peninsula was ruled by 3 different kingdoms, one of which was the Silla kingdom. The king of Silla, Gyeongdok, a few decades after this event took place, sponsored the building of a temple on this site in honoring both Maitreya and Amitabha, and marking that site. And then you can find this story in a really interesting book by an interesting guy named Richard McBride. This book is called Domesticating the Dharma, Buddhist Cults and the Hwayom Synthesis in Silla Korea. And this is what he has to say about this. It's an interesting conclusion or summary of this story, the significance of the story, by saying that these two commoners, they were not aristocrats. You can, if you know enough about Korean culture, I guess you can tell from their names that they were not members of the aristocracy. By saying that these two commoners attained Buddhahood in this very body, the author of this tale, obviously influenced by the doctrine that all beings inherently possess Buddha nature, asserts that single-minded devotion to a Buddhist deity is a viable and efficacious path of practice that not only causes the aspirant to acquire merit, but enables him to access his full spiritual potential. In other words, this is a testimony to the power of chanting. Now, so that story took place in between the years 706 and 709. Fast forward another 200 years. In China, which is not shown on this map, this is a map of the Korean Peninsula, which I'll explain a little bit about in a second. In China, about 200 years after Pukpuk and Pudul and Pakpak, that is, there was a great Zen master named Ming Yangsho. And one of his practices was to recite the Great Durani every day, 6 times. He had many practices. He had very strong, he was famous for his strong, rigorous daily practice. And word of this great Zen master spread throughout China and into Korea. And the king of Goryeo appeared. So I have indicated on this map down here, if you see Pudul and Pakpak, this is approximately where they were. This is approximately where Paegwal-san mountain is, somewhere around there. I think I've got that right. This is Goryeo, the kingdom of Goryeo, around this time. And around the time of this story. And the king of this region, in yellow, sent emissaries. Well, actually, he sent 36 Buddhist monks from Goryeo to go study with Ming, because the king of Goryeo was so impressed with Ming that he wanted Ming's teachings to be brought to Korea, to Goryeo. And so he sent 36 monks there to study under Ming, and each one of them received transmission, as we say in Zen, from Ming, and returned to Goryeo to teach. Fast forward another 250 years or so, Chinul, very famous Korean Zen master, was very much influenced by Ming, and quotes from Ming directly in one of his most important writings. He says that Ming is an authority on the one approach that surpasses all precedents. This is just a nice quote from Ming's teachings. Samadhi is the essence of one's mind. Prajna is the function of one's mind. Since samadhi is in fact prajna, the essence is not separate from the function. And so here's check out that reference. This. Now, fast forward another 904, let's see, 950. Yeah, so now we're going several hundred years later to Sosante, the great Sosante. So this is another map of the Korean Peninsula, indicating the invasion of Korea by the Japanese that occurred during the lifetime of Sosante, for which Sosante is very famous as a leader of the fight against the Japanese invasion. He's a national hero in Korea because of this, and all Zen people in Korea to this day trace their Zen lineage back to Sosante. And he was a very strong advocate of chanting and mantra recitation practice. Now, by this time, there were in Korea and elsewhere some what I will refer to as dogmatic purists who insisted that chanting is not correct practice, or at least not correct Zen practice, and in particular chanting to Amitabha or Maitreya or some a Buddha or Bodhisattva is what some people sometimes call, other power practice. And so Sosante took this teaching head on. And he, in particular, responded to people who would say things like, well, your own mind is the Pure Land, so you cannot be born in the Pure Land. And your own nature is Amitabha, so Amitabha cannot appear in front of you. And so to this, Sosante says, these words seem to be correct, and yet they are wrong. The Buddha has no craving or anger, so do I also have no craving or anger? So, so what Sosante is saying is if you say that your own mind is a pure land, so you cannot be born in the pure land, he's saying basically, oh really? you know, uh, and he goes on to point out other possible differences. He's saying basically, my way of putting this is that Sosante is saying, let's not pretend to be more enlightened than we are. Let's adopt for ourselves practices that are consistent, not with some um, dogmatic idea about how we're supposed to practice, but that actually conforms to our actual state right now. Therefore, even though everybody's nature is Buddha, since in practice we are sentient beings, if we refer to our attributes and functions, that is how we really are. We are as different from Buddhas as heaven and earth. So Santesa also specifically emphasized the importance of mantra practice. So this business with my face showing up on the screen is a lot like Buddhist practice in general. I'm constantly having to get myself out of the way. Uh, uh, and he specifically says, as to mantras, it may be relatively easy to control karma that we have made in the present life. In which case, you can just simply correct it by, taking necessary actions through your own effort. However, the karma accumulated over many previous lives is very difficult to erase. For this work, you must rely on the mystic power of repeating a mantra. Now, sometimes I hit the wrong button and take the presentation careening off into the wrong direction. What Sosante is saying, you can leave out the whole business about past lives and present lives. You can just say, easy karma is easy to deal with. Just be a better person, right? Just abandon negative actions and cultivate good actions. No problem. But if we find ourselves returning over and over again to negative thoughts, negative actions, and find ourselves over and over again not practicing good actions and good thoughts, maybe we need a little help. And this is just kind of doubling down. At present, some people of the world wish to be correct and yet are perverse, wish to be clean and yet are stained. They prosper in virtue and yet are poor in blessings. That is, they have the great, the great good fortune to be virtuous in their actions, and yet the things that happen to them in their lives are not so good. They do good deeds and yet have personal tragedies, are very much without evil and yet have misfortune, do not kill and yet die young. All of these misfortunes are due to past karma. The Lengyan Jing, which is the Surangama Sutra, says, for those who intone the divine mantras, their 5 heinous and serious sins are like wind-blown sand, that is, blown away by the as Sosante says, set up here, by the mystic power of repeating a mantra. And they are certain to become, in the next life, they are certain to become Buddhas. Here's a, since we're talking about mantras, here's a good one. Jijang Bosal's Durani for eliminating fixed karma. Om Badamani Dani Sabaha. Om Badamani Dani Sabaha. Om Badamani Dani Sabaha. Now, so this has been a little bit of a history lesson so far, and now we're getting up to more present time. Specifically, 1972, the year that Zen Master Sung San came to the West. And by that time, many Westerners already had some pretty set ideas about what Zen is and is not. In particular, there was a strong tendency to believe that just sitting is the only true Zen practice. So this is similar to what Sosantesa many centuries ago had been arguing against this, what I referred to previously as dogmatic purists. From the perspective of dogmatic purists, the idea that chanting is a legitimate practice is viewed with puzzlement, suspicious, and often with open hostility. And so here's a great quote. I love this quote from D.T. Suzuki in his book, The Manual of Zen Buddhism, which was first published in 1934. properly speaking, the Durani has no legitimate place in Zen. So Durani is a Sanskrit word. It is often used to refer to any type of mantra practice or chanting, and that's the way in which Suzuki is using it in this book. Now, Master Sung San obviously couldn't go along with this way of thinking, because he himself had had his first great awakening experience while chanting the Great Dharani, the very practice that Zen Master Young Ming had been practicing 1,000 years previously, and that it helped to through his teaching. Young Ming had helped to encourage. I mean, he didn't originate the practice. Wasn't solely responsible for the popularity of this practice in Korea or elsewhere, but he certainly encouraged it and promoted it. Young Ming did. And so Zen Master Sung San was, in a sense, a direct descendant of Young Ming in his own practice of chanting the Great Dharani. Because after his great awakening experience, his famous 100-day retreat when he chanted the Great Dharani, he continued to chant the Great Dharani for the rest of his life. So Master Sung San emphasized chanting in a way that made many Western Zen students decidedly uncomfortable. And this discomfort was not just due to the anti-chanting imprecations. I like that word, imprecation. It's a good one. But it wasn't just because D.T. Suzuki and others had been saying that, in true Zen, or properly speaking in Zen, there shouldn't be chanting and Duranis and mantras. But it's also due to the fact that many times when Westerners are looking to Buddhism or Zen or meditation, they're looking for something that doesn't seem or feel or look religious. And it's hard to get much more religious. So this is a preview video to the class on Buddhist chanting, and one of the main chants that we're going to be doing in the class is the homage to the three jewels, which not only involves a lot of chanting and it has one mantra in it, but there's also a lot of bowing in it, and so and here's another good mantra, very similar to the last one, Kwansin Bosal's mantra for eliminating fixed karma. Om Araruge Sabaha, Om Araruge Sabaha, Om Araruge Sabaha. So despite the resistance from his students and from just sitting dogmatic purists, Zen Master Sung San persisted. And he convinced his students to learn how to chant. Now, it should be emphasized that this wasn't some peculiar idiosyncrasy of Zen Master Sung San's. It wasn't some unique feature of Korean Buddhism. Oh, Korean Zen people, they chant. It's Japanese Zen, not so much. Of course, everybody knows that Japanese Zen people do chant as well. But this business of chanting didn't start with Pakpak and Puduk and Pakpak in 706. It goes all the way back to the Buddha. The Buddha taught his students to chant. And as I showed in the first slide, this is a universal feature. You go to any Buddhist temple anywhere in Asia, and they're chanting. Zen Master Young Ming, of course, as we said before, chanted the Great Dharani. Zen Master Hakuin, who is sometimes thought of as an exemplar of this just sitting dogmatic purist sort of point of view. Rinzai Zen, just sit. Master Hakuin encouraged people to chant the Kanzeon chant, the extend life 10-phrase Kanon Sutra, and Meijuku Kanon Gyo. And of course, even T.T. Suzuki. I mean, why did he? If properly speaking, Duranis have no place in Zen, why was he talking about it in his book on Zen practice? Because he had a whole chapter on Duranis in that book, which he, despite his reservations. And so, now, what about the class itself? Here's a this is the Om Araruge Sabaha chant. This is a little graphic that I, just for laughs, made up. A pardon to anybody who doesn't appreciate or get. Doctor Who references. In the class, it would be very practical. I've given a little bit of a history lesson here, some background, but the class itself will focus on the actual practice of chanting. Try to be as practical as possible. Um, the first chant that we'll do 6 chants in the course of this class. It's a year-long class, and we'll do 6 chants, and each chant we'll spend 2 months on. We'll meet twice a month, and so we'll have 4 class meetings on each of these chants, and we'll go through them. In some cases, one syllable at a time. But the point not to be, encouraging people to think a lot about these chants or write PhD dissertations or whatever. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The point is to learn the chants and to know what you're chanting. What a concept. We'll start with Jijang Bosal chanting, in part because that ties in with another class that I'll be teaching at the same time, separate class on Jijang Bosal. Then we'll do the Yebel, or the Homage to the Three Jewels, which is a wonderful, wonderful chant. Then we'll do the Heart Sutra, which I like to refer to as Xuanzang's Heart Sutra, although that gets some people say, well, it's a little controversial, but not. It's how the Heart Sutra is normally thought of, um, except by academics. Then we'll do the Kanzeon chant, which is different from all the other chants in that this is not a chant that Zen Master Songsan taught. It's a chant that my teacher, Zen Master Degak, who was a student of Zen Master Songsan and received Dharma transmission from him. My teacher, Zen Master Degak, teaches us to chant the Kanzeon chant, which is not originally Japanese, but originally Chinese. Then, of course, we'll do the Great Durani. The Great Durani of spiritually sublime phrases, which is more or less what Shinmyo Jangu De Durani means. And then we'll end with Kwanzaa Bosal chanting. So we will begin and end with what's sometimes called Yumbul chanting. Okay, here we go. Let's move myself out of the way again. It's a good teaching, you always have to make sure to move yourself out of the way. I like that about this Zoom presentation here. So here's what we'll be doing in the class. We will learn the chants, and maybe you already know the chants, so maybe you'll learn them a little better, or whatever. So maybe you can do the chants. Maybe by the end of the class, you'll be able to do the chants from memory, or maybe you already know them more or less from memory, but you can do them. It's actually learning chanting is a never-ending process, even with a single chant. Okay. We'll look at what they mean. Now I want to emphasize, we won't be looking at what they mean in any, deep, secret, hidden, esoteric sense, but just what do the words mean? What are we saying when we chant? Talk about the history and the background. Some of the chants have very interesting backgrounds. The background of, we talked a little bit about the Great Durani and how far back that goes, back to Young Ming. And before that, Young Ming didn't invent the Great Durani by any means. The history and background of Buddhist chanting in general, the fact that the Buddha himself taught his students to chant, and there's some particularly interesting history about Chinese chanting, which is Korean chanting is basically Chinese chanting with a Korean accent. I'm not sure all Koreans would particularly agree with or appreciate that characterization, but it's largely true. We'll learn some chanting terminology. Yumbul, what does Yumbul mean? What is a mantra? What is a Dharani? Are they different? What does Kido mean? And it might not be what you think. If you've ever had anybody explain to you what Kido means, it was very likely not right. We'll learn some other terminology like Sino-Korean, which is basically just how Korean people pronounce Chinese characters. We'll learn what is Hangul, what is Romaja. These will not be things that will be they'll be used as tools in the class, not as the primary emphasis by any means. And one thing that I think is important to emphasize is chanting as a personal practice that you can do on your own. You don't have to have a group of people to chant with. You can chant by yourself, just like sitting meditation. In fact, you can combine chanting with sitting meditation. You can do chanting essentially as a form of sitting meditation. Um, and we'll answer the question, why is a Japanese chant included along with these other chants? This slide refers to some very valuable resources. I'm not going to go through each one of these. You'll notice Richard McBride's name shows up several times here. He has traveled to Korea many times. He's has a lot of very practical, interesting information on the practice of chanting as it is taught and done by Korean people today. Uh, some pretty fascinating stuff. And his articles, at least the ones that I'm citing here, are available through academia.edu, which anybody can sign up for. You don't have to. You just go to there, you register, you identify yourself as an independent researcher, and then you'll be able to get these articles without paying JSTOR or anybody else huge sums of money, or finding a library that has them. There's another article that's freely available online, really interesting, fairly recent article on kind of an anthropological study of Buddhist chanting in Korean Buddhist temples. And finally, this book is a gold mine of information that the Jogye order makes freely available for download online. Check it out. Yeah. Okay, so this slide kind of goes through some things I've already mentioned, but it's some misconceptions or ideas about chanting that need to be cleared up. Chanting, mantras, Duranis, Yumbo, that is what some people call Nyanfo or Nembutsu, are often mistakenly associated with so some people think, oh, mantras, that means esoteric Buddhism or tantric Buddhism. Nembutsu, that means Pure Land Buddhism. Or just in general, whatever it is, it's not Zen, right? So mantra practice is actually ubiquitous in Mahayana Buddhism, and it's also ubiquitous in Theravada Buddhism, where it's called Parita chanting. And Theravadan Buddhists may not agree that when they do Parita chanting, it's the same thing as mantra practice, but that's fine. I think it very, very sure looks like mantra chanting. Let's put it that way. Again, sometimes it's thought that if you recite Kwan Seum Bo Sol, or Namu Amida Bo, Namu Amida Bo, or Ji Chang Bo Sol, that you're doing some kind of Pure Land practice, and it simply isn't true. Yumbo, which is the Korean pronunciation of Nyanfo or Nembutsu, just means mindfulness of Buddha. That's what it means. Its literal meaning, mindfulness of Buddha. And the Buddha himself taught this practice. And in Theravadan Buddhism, it's called one of the 6 recollections, or the 10 recollections sometimes. And if you want to read more about that, find Buddhaghosa's really interesting. Buddhaghosa was a fascinating guy, one of the key figures in the history of Theravada Buddhism, and his magnum opus, The Path to Purification, has a lot to say about mindfulness of Buddha practice. In Korean Buddhism, Yumbo, this term Yumbo, is sometimes used very specifically to refer to the practice of reciting Namu Amida Bo. But sometimes it is used to refer to the practice of reciting the name of any Buddha or Bodhisattva. And sometimes it's not even a Buddhist Buddha or Bodhisattva. Sometimes it's the mountain god, Sanshin, or the 7 stars, Chilsan, which are traditional deities worshipped by the Buddhists, by the Korean people long before Buddhism came to Korea. Yeonbul is also sometimes used to refer to chanting just in general. So the class will have a practical focus. The intention is the only purpose of this class is to encourage and support the practice of chanting. As I said before, we'll meet twice a month. We'll spend 2 months on each chant. Once a month, we'll have at least 30 minutes of class time devoted to discussion during any of the classes. So the classes are all recorded, and everybody can watch them for free on YouTube after the classes happen. If you want to participate in the class as it's happening, you need to register. You need to go to my Patreon site. There's a link here, and sign up. It's $2 a month to register for one class, $4 a month for two classes, and so forth. In this particular class, the emphasis is not on learning the Chinese characters, but for each chant, we are going to go syllable by syllable through each chant, sometimes in more detail than others. And I'll provide as part of the class, things like the Hangul script, the pinyin, which is the manual pronunciation, as well as the Chinese characters for all the chants. And this can be very helpful if you want to if you want to check to see if anything I'm saying is wrong, which I encourage you to do, because I often say things that are not right. I often find my own mistakes. Sometimes other people find my mistakes. I'm very grateful for that. And please let me know if you think I'm saying something wrong. Maybe you're wrong, but who knows? I'd be interested to talk about it if you find something that you think I'm saying that's not quite right or completely wrong. Just as one example of the type of thing we'll be looking at, in the first chant that we were looking at, the first line of that chant is Namu Nambang Waju Jijang Bosal, which literally means bow down to the southern direction, transformation Lord, Jijang Bosal. Why is Jijang Bosal associated with the southern direction? This is an example of the type of thing that we'll talk about in the class. And why is he called the Lord of Transformation? It's good to know what we're chanting and to have a general idea of what it means. Now Zen Master Sung San famously said, if your mind is very clear, then even chanting Coca-Cola is a good practice. But this raises the question, which Sosante raised. He said, basically Sosante said, now I'm paraphrasing what Sosante said. What if your mind is not very clear? Then maybe Coca-Cola is not the best chanting practice. So Zen Master Sung San, even though he used this as a provocative example, he never actually taught people to chant Coca-Cola. He taught people to chant the Great Durani, the Heart Sutra, the Amish of the Three Jewels, the chants that we were going to be talking about in this class. That's what he taught people to chant. And these are the kinds of chants that are good for us, people whose minds are not very clear. These are chants that either are the words of the Buddha themselves that we are chanting and reciting, or they are poetic that is chantable. It's the chants that Zen Master Sung San taught his students, and then also the Kanzeon chant. These are very chantable. They're very musical. They have a wonderful intrinsic musical rhythm and sound that lends itself to chanting. And as you do these chants, you'll be learning about basic Buddhist concepts. For example, in Buddhist cosmology, we live in Jambudvipa. You might have encountered that word. What is Jambudvipa? It's also known as the southern continent. So that's why Jijang Bosal is referred to as the southern, is associated with the southern direction, because Jijang Bosal is entrusted with taking care of the beings here in Jambudvipa. So Shakyamuni Buddha came here to Jambudvipa 2,500 years ago and taught. Maitreya Buddha will be coming sometime in the future. I wonder when. I would like him to hurry up, but but in between the lifetime of Shakyamuni in the past and the lifetime of Maitreya in the future, one idea about Jijang Bosal is that he is entrusted with taking care of us in the meantime. And you could also learn about why is Jambudvipa called Jambudvipa, because of the Jambu tree, but I'll skip over that for now. So knowing more about one's own tradition can help you to appreciate other people's traditions. In fact, it can help you to realize that other people's traditions are not really all that other. Once you come to realize these chants that are associated with the Korean Buddhist tradition are really in Chinese, including the Heart Sutra. And you can see line by line, syllable by syllable, that we're just pronouncing the same characters differently. Um, so, in other words, we're basically chanting the same thing. Yeah. So let's see, what else do I have here? Oh yeah. We'll talk about mantras, the place of mantras. The mantras were originally in Sanskrit and they were transliterated into Chinese. We'll talk about what transliteration means if you don't know. And uh, oh, well, over here is this is a wonderful Durrani. This is another one of the Duranis. So in his book, Manual of Zen Buddhism or whatever it was called, the book that he published in 1934, when he said that Duranis have, properly speaking, Duranis have no place in Zen. He then proceeded to translate and talk about three Duranis that are always chanted in Japanese Buddhist temples, including Japanese Zen Buddhist temples. One of which is the Great Durrani, which is the version that the Japanese Buddhist chant is actually slightly different from the one the Korean Buddhists chant. But this Durrani, the Boso Soje Gosang Darani, if you know the Jijang Bosal chant, or the Kwanzaa Bosal chant, or the Namu Amida Bull chant, or the Sogamuni Bull chant, then you have heard this Durrani before. Um, and it's yeah, it is up there. This Durrani is up there with the Heart Sutra and the Great Durrani in terms of popularity throughout Asia. And one of the interesting things about it is that there's even a version in Tibetan Buddhism that's very popular that is almost exactly the same as the one that Zen Master Sung San taught his students. So the classes themselves will begin and end with chanting. We will always begin with the homage to the three jewels, which is the right way to begin things. Um, at the end of the class, we will chant whatever the chant is that we're currently working on, and then that'll be followed by the four great vows in as they're pronounced in Sino-Korean: Baal Sang Soan, Jungseng Mubyeon Soan Do, Bone Mujin Soan Dan, Bomu Muryang Soan Hak, Bulto Musang Soan Song. And if what I just said sounds like gibberish, well, hopefully, after a little bit of this class, that will be less so. Videos of all the chants are available for free on YouTube. There's some that I've posted on YouTube that have the Romaja spelled out. Some of them also have the Hanja, the Chinese characters, along with them as well. And I'm going to be actually working on some improved versions of those videos. Other people have videos of these chants as well. They're actually not quite as helpful as mine are because I have the words along with them. But you don't have to know Chinese or Korean. And by the end of the class, you won't know Chinese or Korean. This is not about learning a foreign language, but it is about learning these chants as they are traditionally done. I think, yeah, that was my last slide. And again, all of these classes will be recorded, will be freely available. So no matter when you're watching this video, if it could be years from now, but it's all there. It will all be made available. But if you want to participate in class, I would encourage you to do so. I would love to have you come and participate live in the class, ask questions, discuss, Google some of the things that I'm saying and check to see if I'm right, and let me know if you think I'm not. I would love to see you there, and just get end by reciting the four great vows one more time, a little bit more seriously. Bao Sang Soan, Jung Sing Mubyeon Soan Do, Bone Mujin Soan Dan, Bomun Muryang Soan Hak, Bulto Musang Soan Song. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you soon. Now I just have to figure out how to end the video, which I've almost got it.